I'm Luke, 28 male, and I discovered my family took a vacation to Spain using my credit card after my mother posted a photo captioned, "Finally some peace without drama." For a long time, I had accepted my role in the family. I was the reliable one, the stable one, the one they called when things went wrong. My father, David, a man whose ambition had always outpaced his follow-through, ran a small contracting business that seemed to perpetually exist on the verge of collapse. My mother, Karen, was his loyal partner, a woman whose love felt conditional, often measured in what you could provide for the family unit. A unit whose center of gravity was, and always had been, my younger brother, Mark. Mark was the golden child. 2 years my junior, he was the artist, the dreamer, the one who was never expected to be practical. While I was taking extra shifts at a grocery store in high school to save for a used car, my parents were co-signing a loan for Mark's brand new sedan, a graduation gift. While I was meticulously planning my college applications around scholarships and in-state tuition, they were telling everyone how Mark needed to attend a private arts college out of state to truly find himself. The unspoken truth, the one that hung in the air during every family dinner, was that my practicality was what enabled their indulgence of his impracticality. My responsibility was the bedrock upon which his dreams were built. I remember one specific incident with perfect clarity. It was during my junior year of college, and Mark's tuition payment was late, not just a little late but dangerously so. He was at risk of being dropped from his classes. My father called me, his voice a practiced blend of paternal concern and weary resignation. "Luke, my boy," he'd said, "we're in a bit of a tight spot. A client is late on a payment, you know how it is, we just need to get Mark through this month." I knew what was coming next. I had a small savings account, money I had painstakingly squirreled away from my part-time IT job on campus. It was my emergency fund, my safety net. "I don't have that much, Dad," I told him, the lie feeling thin even to my own ears. He sighed, a sound heavy with disappointment. "It's for your brother, Luke. Family helps family." I ended up wiring him nearly $2,000, almost everything I had. I ate ramen for the rest of the semester and put off buying textbooks, relying on the library's copies. 2 weeks later, I saw a post on my mother's social media. It was a picture of Mark beaming, holding up the keys to a top-of-the-line professional camera. The caption read, "So proud of our boy, investing in his future, can't wait to see the art he creates." There was no mention of the tuition, no acknowledgement of my sacrifice. When I cautiously brought it up with my mother on the phone, her voice turned cool. "Luke, we handled the tuition, your father's client paid up, and Mark needed that camera for a class. You wouldn't want to hold back his education, would you?" They hadn't used my money for the tuition at all. They had used it to buy him expensive equipment while I was counting pennies. I never saw that money again. Another time, about 3 years ago, my parents' car broke down. It was a major repair, something to do with the transmission. Again, the call came to me. This time, I had a real job, a good one, as a software engineer. My salary was a source of quiet pride for me and a source of public pride for them. They loved telling their friends about their son, the engineer. They were less keen on the details, like the fact that I was still aggressively paying off my student loans, the ones I had taken out so they wouldn't have to worry. "We'll pay you back, son," my father promised, his voice earnest. "First of the month, you have my word." I paid the repair bill directly over the phone to the mechanic. It was over $3,000. The first of the month came and went, then the next and the next. When I finally asked about it, my dad clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Come on, Luke, don't be like that, it all evens out in the end." That same month, they helped Mark put a down payment on a new apartment because his old one was stifling his creativity. It was this history, this long and wearying pattern of being the family ATM and emotional punching bag, that led to the credit card. About a year ago, my mother had a health scare. It turned out to be nothing serious, but it involved a late-night trip to the emergency room. They didn't have the funds on hand to cover the copay and were embarrassed. The next day, I offered a solution I thought was responsible. I added my father as an authorized user on one of my high-limit credit cards. "This is for emergencies only," I stated, looking both of them in the eye. "True emergencies, a medical issue, a critical car repair, that's it." They agreed, their faces models of sincerity. My mother even shed a tear, telling me I was he best son a mother could ask for. For a year, it went untouched. I checked the statement every month and the balance was always zero. I allowed myself to believe just for a moment that we had turned a corner, that they finally respected me, not just my income. That was my mistake. The evening it all fell apart was unremarkable. It was a Tuesday and I was unwinding after a long day of coding. I'd made myself a simple dinner and was sitting on my couch scrolling aimlessly through my phone. It was my nightly ritual, a way to disconnect my brain from the logic of programming and drift into the messy, chaotic world of other people's lives. I tapped through filtered photos of dinners I'd never eat, sunsets in places I'd never been, and announcements from old high school classmates. It was mindless, soothing, and distant. Then I saw my mother's post. The image popped up in my feed, bright and jarringly cheerful. It was a photograph of the three of them, my father, David, my mother, Karen, and my brother, Mark. They were standing on a wide, sun-drenched terracotta patio. Behind them, a stunning landscape of rolling green hills unfolded under a brilliant blue sky. My father had his arm around my mother, a wide, relaxed grin on his face. Mark stood beside them, holding a glass of what looked like sangria, looking smug and satisfied. They were all tanned, happy, and utterly carefree. It was the kind of picture you see in a travel magazine. My first thought was a flicker of confusion. Where were they? It didn't look like anywhere nearby. They hadn't mentioned going on a trip. My thumb hovered over the screen as I read the caption my mother had written beneath the photo. Finally, some peace without drama, soaking up the Spanish sun, Spain family time making memories no stress. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Spain, they were in Spain. The casual cheerfulness of the post felt like a deliberate performance, a show for an audience that didn't include me, but it was the first part of the caption that truly twisted in my gut. Finally, some peace without drama. Drama, was that me? In our family's silent lexicon, was I the drama? Was my expectation of being paid back drama? Was my gentle questioning of why Mark always got what he wanted while I was expected to fund it drama? Was my existence, my quiet and responsible life, the source of conflict they needed a vacation from? The implication was so clear, so cutting, that I felt the air leave my lungs. I was not just excluded, I was the reason they were celebrating their escape. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Spain. A trip to Spain wasn't cheap. My father's business was, as always, just about to turn a corner. My mother worked part-time at a local boutique. Mark was a freelance graphic designer whose income was sporadic at best. There was no way they could have afforded a trip like this. Not without. A cold dread washed over me, a certainty so absolute it felt like ice water flooding my veins. My mind, trained to find patterns and solve problems, made the connection instantly. The emergency credit card. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the social media app and opened my banking app. I navigated to my credit card accounts, my breath held tight in my chest. I tapped on the one they had access to, the one with the pristine, year-long zero balance. The screen loaded and the numbers appeared. It was no longer zero. The balance was $8,431.57. I scrolled through the recent transactions, my mind feeling strangely detached, as if I were analyzing a bug in someone else's code. The charges were all there, laid out in a neat, chronological list of betrayal. First, there were the airline tickets. 3 round-trip flights to Malaga, Spain, purchased 2 weeks ago. The charge was just over $4,000. My stomach clenched. They had planned this for weeks, talking in hushed tones, making secret arrangements, all while I went about my life completely oblivious. Then came the charge that made me feel truly sick. A single transaction for Villa Silo, dated a week ago, for $3,500. A quick search on my laptop confirmed it, a luxury villa rental in the hills of Andalusia, complete with a private pool, daily housekeeping, and panoramic views. The very place where they had posed for that photograph, smiling and celebrating their peace from me. There were smaller charges, too. A rental car picked up at Malaga Airport, a charge at a large Spanish supermarket, a dinner at a seaside restaurant 2 nights ago. They weren't just on vacation, they were living a life of luxury, all on my dime. They were using my hard work to fund their escape from the drama of my existence. I leaned back on the couch, the phone slipping from my numb fingers and clattering onto the floor. I stared at the ceiling of my quiet apartment, the place I had been so proud to afford on my own. Every beam, every fixture was a testament to my diligence. My sacrifices. And they had taken that diligence and twisted it into a weapon against me. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had stolen my trust, my sense of family, and my dignity, and they had broadcasted it to the world with a cheerful, dismissive caption. In that moment, sitting alone in the quiet of my living room, the years of accumulated hurt and resentment crystallized into something new. The shock faded, the pain subsided, and what was left was a cold, clear, and unshakable resolve. For a long time, perhaps an hour, I didn't move. I just sat on the couch, staring at the blank television screen, replaying the sequence of events in my head. The photo, the caption, the credit card statement. Each detail was a piece of a puzzle I had been unwilling to solve for years, and now, with all the pieces on the table, the final picture was ugly and undeniable. My first impulse was a wave of raw, unfiltered emotion. I wanted to call them. I wanted to scream into the phone, to demand an explanation, to ask them how they could be so cruel, so brazen. I imagined my father's blustering excuses, my mother's wounded denials, Mark's sullen silence. I could play the entire conversation out in my head because I had played versions of it 100 times before. It would end, as it always did, with me being made to feel like I was the one in the wrong. I would be accused of being ungrateful, of being selfish, of not understanding the pressures they were under. They would twist my legitimate hurt into an attack on the family, and I would be cast once again as the villain. The drama. But as the initial heat of anger began to cool, something else took its place. It was a profound sense of exhaustion. I was tired of the arguments. I was tired of pleading my case, of trying to make them see my perspective. I was tired of being the responsible adult in a family of perpetual children. What was the point of another screaming match across an ocean? It wouldn't get my money back. It wouldn't erase the insult. It would just be another scene in a play that I was finally realizing I didn't want to be in anymore. Confronting them with emotion had never worked. It was like throwing water at a brick wall. They didn't understand my feelings because they didn't want to. My feelings were an inconvenience to their narrative, a disruption to their comfort. They wanted my resources, not my respect. They wanted my financial support, not my presence. The photograph and its caption weren't a thoughtless mistake, they were a declaration. They were telling me and the world exactly where I stood. And so a different idea began to form in my mind. It was a cold, logical, and terrifyingly simple thought. If they didn't respect my feelings, perhaps they would respect consequences. If they saw me as a bank, what does a bank do when it detects fraud? It doesn't call the thief to ask them why they did it. It doesn't try to understand their emotional state. It simply freezes the assets and shuts down the account. The idea was so radical, so contrary to my entire life's programming of being the dutiful son, that it almost took my breath away. Could I do that? Could I actually treat this situation for what it was, a financial crime? They had used my credit card without my permission for a non-emergency purpose. That was the definition of fraud. The word echoed in my mind. Fraud. It wasn't a family dispute. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was fraud. I picked my phone up off the floor. The screen was still lit up with the credit card statement. I looked at the name of the villa again. Villa Silo. Heaven Villa. The irony was bitter. They were in their own private heaven, paid for by my personal hell of long hours and thankless work. I decided then and there, I would not call them, I would not text them, I would not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. My response would not be emotional, it would be procedural. I would remove myself from the equation entirely and let the system handle it. The credit card company, the villa management. These were businesses, entities that operate on rules and regulations, not on guilt trips and emotional manipulation. They would be my unlikely allies. My plan solidified with a chilling clarity. Step 1. Call the credit card company's 24/7 fraud department. Report the card stolen and the recent charges as fraudulent. This would immediately freeze the account and trigger a chargeback process for the flights, and most importantly, the villa. Step 2. Find the contact information for Villa Silo in Spain. Step 3. Call them directly. Inform the management that the cardholder, me, did not authorize the payment for their stay. Explain that the card has been reported stolen and that any charges would be reversed. I wouldn't be yelling or demanding they be kicked out. I would simply be stating a fact: their payment was invalid. The consequences of that fact would be theirs to manage. I stood up and wailed. Head to my desk, my movements feeling deliberate and steady. The trembling in my hands was gone, replaced by a strange, steely calm. This wasn't about revenge, I told myself. Revenge was hot-blooded and messy. This was about justice. It was about restoring a balance that had been skewed for my entire life. I was no longer Luke the son, the brother, the doormat. I was Luke, the account holder, the victim of fraud, and I was about to file a report. I was drawing a line, not in the sand, but in concrete. And for the first time, I felt a sense of power, not from my income, but from my decision to finally protect myself. The first call was the easiest. I found the number for my credit card's fraud prevention department on the back of another card in my wallet. As I dialed, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were performing a task for someone else. The automated system greeted me with a calm, synthetic voice, and after a few prompts, I was connected to a human being. Thank you for calling card services. My name is Brenda. How can I help you tonight? Her voice was professional, a little tired but clear. Hello, Brenda, I said, my own voice sounding surprisingly level. I need to report my card as stolen and dispute several fraudulent charges. I can certainly help you with that, sir. Can I get your name and the credit card number? I provided the information. I could hear the gentle tapping of her keyboard in the background. Okay, Mr. Evans, I have your account pulled up here. Which charges are you disputing? All of them, I said, my voice unwavering. Starting with the airline tickets to Malaga, Spain, purchased on, I checked the date on my app, 2 weeks ago, and then a charge for a Villa Silo and several other charges made in Spain over the last few days. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I see, the entire trip. Yes, the entire trip was unauthorized. And you're saying your card was stolen? Brenda asked, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more formal. Yes, I said, the lie slipping out smoothly. It wasn't technically a lie. They had stolen my trust, my generosity. Stealing the card number was just a technicality. I only just realized it was missing and saw the charges online. I understand, sir. I am so sorry you're having to deal with this. I am freezing the account right now. No further charges will be approved. I heard a few more decisive clicks of her keyboard. There, the account is secured. We will issue you a new card, which you should receive in 3 to 5 business days. We will also begin an immediate investigation into these fraudulent charges. You will be issued a temporary credit for the full amount of $8,431.57 while we resolve this. You will not be held responsible for any of these transactions. Thank you, Brenda, I said. I appreciate your help. Of course, Mr. Evans. Is there anything else I can do for you? No, that's all. We ended the call and the silence in my apartment felt different. It was the silence of a door being slammed shut. Step 1 was complete. The financial pipeline was severed. Now for step 2. My hands felt steady as I typed Villa Silo Andalusia, Spain into the search bar. The first result was a glossy website for a luxury vacation rental company. The pictures were the same as the ones in my mother's post: the infinity pool, the terracotta tiles, the breathtaking views. I navigated to the Contact Us page. There it was, a phone number for the management office complete with the country code for Spain. My heart began to beat a little faster. This was the real point of no return. The call to the credit card company was impersonal, a standard procedure. This call was different. This call would have immediate, real-world consequences for the 3 people I had until a few hours ago considered my family. I took a deep breath and reminded myself of the caption, "Finally some peace without drama." They had drawn the battle lines, not me. I dialed the number. It was late evening for me, which meant it was the middle of the night in Spain. It rang several times, and I was about to hang up when a sleepy, heavily accented voice answered. Digame. I cleared my throat. Hello, do you speak English? There was a sigh. Yes, a little. Who is this? It is 3 in the morning. My name is Luke Evans, I said, speaking slowly and clearly. I am calling about one of your properties, Villa Silo. I believe there is a family staying there, the Evans family. They checked in a few days ago. Yes, the Evans family. What is the problem? The voice, a man's, was now more alert, tinged with suspicion. The problem, I said, choosing my words carefully, is that they paid for the villa using my credit card. I am the cardholder and I did not authorize that payment. I have just reported the card as stolen to my bank and the payment for the villa will be reversed. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the man breathing. You are saying the payment is no good? That's correct, I confirmed. The charge is fraudulent. I am legally obligated to inform you of this. I am very sorry for the inconvenience, but the booking was made without my knowledge or consent. The man let out a string of what I assumed were Spanish curses. Madre mia, so they are in my villa with no pay. I'm afraid so, I said, feeling a strange mix of guilt and grim satisfaction. The chargeback process has already been started by my bank. I just wanted to make you aware of the situation directly. I understand, the man said, his voice now cold and hard. Thank you for this information. I will handle this. Do not worry, we will handle this. He hung up without saying goodbye. I lowered the phone from my ear and placed it on the desk. It was done. The second and final domino had been pushed. All I had to do now was wait. I didn't know what the villa manager would do or when, but I knew that the peace my family was enjoying was about to come to a very abrupt end. I felt a tremor of fear at the magnitude of what I had just done, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of profound, liberating finality. I had taken back control. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark of my apartment, the glow of my laptop the only light, and I worked. I coded, losing myself in the clean, predictable logic of functions and variables. It was a world where actions had clear and direct consequences, a stark contrast to the messy, emotional chaos of my family life. Work was my fortress, and I retreated into it. The first few hours after the call to Spain were silent. My phone, which I had placed face down on the corner of my desk, remained dark and quiet. Part of me wondered if I had imagined the whole thing, if I would wake up and it would all have been a stress-induced nightmare. But the lingering image of the credit card statement in my mind was proof that it was all too real. The silence broke at 8:17 a.m., which would have been just after 2 p.m. in Spain. My phone vibrated against the wood of the desk, a sudden jarring buzz. The screen lit up with my father's name. I stared at it, my heart giving a single hard thump. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again, my father. Again, I ignored it. He tried a third time and a fourth. The calls came one after another, a frantic, desperate barrage. After the seventh missed call, a text message appeared. Dad, Luke, call me immediately. It's an emergency. An emergency? The word he had been taught was the only reason to use my card. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I didn't reply. The calls kept coming. 8, 9, 10 missed calls from Dad, then a call from my mother's number. I ignored that too, then another from my dad. 11, 12. It was a digital tantrum. Their panic was bleeding through the phone, a palpable wave of outrage and confusion. They had no idea what was happening, only that their perfect, peaceful world had been shattered. Then came the message that laid it all bare. It wasn't from my parents. It was a notification from my brother, Mark. He hadn't called. Instead, he had sent me a single, stark image. It was a screenshot of his own phone screen showing a text conversation he was having with my father. The last message, the one he clearly wanted me to see, was from Dad and written in all caps. Dad, they locked us out. The manager took the keys and told us the payment was reversed. He said we have 1 hour to pay for the whole week in cash or he's calling the police. Karen is a wreck. What do we do? Beneath the screenshot, Mark had added his own message to me, just 3 words. Mark, fix this now. Fix this, not what happened. Not are you okay? Not even an accusation, just a command. The casual entitlement, the absolute assumption that I was the designated fixer of all their problems was breathtaking. Even now, with their scheme imploding around them, they still saw me not as a person they had wronged, but as a utility they needed to switch back on. I stared at the screenshot. I pictured the scene, the Spanish sun beating down on them not as a gentle warmth but as a harsh, interrogating glare. The villa manager, a man whose sleep I had disturbed, standing there with his arms crossed, demanding payment. My mother, the author of Peace Without Drama, now the center of a very real, very public drama of her own making. My father, his bluster and confidence evaporated, reduced to panicked, all-caps texts. And Mark, the golden child, unable to create his way out of this. Turning to the brother he resented to clean up the mess. A strange sense of calm settled over me. There was no anger, no pity, no guilt. There was only a quiet, resolute certainty that I had done the right thing. They had created this situation. They had lied, they had stolen, and they had insulted me. Now I were facing the consequences. This was not my mess to fix. I put my phone on silent mode, not just vibrate, but completely silent. I didn't turn it off. I wanted to see the messages come in. I wanted a record of their meltdown, but I would not be a participant in it. The calls continued sporadically for another hour. 14 missed calls from Dad, 5 from Mom. A string of increasingly angry texts from Mark, ranging from demands to insults. Mark, are you serious right now? Mark, they're going to call the cops on us. Mark, after everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. You're unbelievable. That last message almost made me laugh. Everything we've done for you. The delusion was so complete, so profound. I left my phone on the desk and went to the kitchen to make coffee. The sun was rising outside my window, casting long shadows across my living room. It was the start of a new day. For them, it was the start of a nightmare of their own creation. For me, it felt like the first day of my life. I sipped my coffee and watched the city wake up, feeling nothing but a vast, empty, and beautiful sense of peace. The drama was thousands of miles away, and for the first time, it had absolutely nothing to do with me. 2 days passed in almost complete silence. After the initial storm of calls and texts, my phone went quiet. I knew they must have been scrambling, figuring out a way home. I imagined the frantic, humiliating calls to other relatives, the cobbled-together story they must have told to explain why they were suddenly destitute in Spain. The thought of their lies being exposed to the wider family gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. They had built their world on a foundation of my quiet compliance, and I had just pulled the cornerstone out from under it. I spent those 2 days in a state of calm anticipation. I went to work, I came home, I cooked my meals. But underneath the placid surface of my routine, I was waiting. I knew a confrontation was inevitable. They wouldn't just let this go. Their pride had been wounded, their comfort disrupted. They would need a target for their rage, and that target was me. It happened on a Thursday evening just after I'd gotten home from work. A car screeched to a halt in the parking lot outside my apartment building, the sound of tires protesting against the asphalt. I looked out the window and saw my father's work truck, a vehicle I hadn't seen parked in my lot for over a year. The doors flew open and all 3 of them got out. David, Karen, and Mark. They looked exhausted, disheveled, and incandescent with fury. I didn't move from the window, I just watched them march towards the entrance of my building. I took a deep breath, my heart rate steady. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times. I knew what I needed to say. A few moments later, a furious pounding began on my door. It wasn't a knock, it was a physical assault on the wood. "Luke, open this door, we know you're in there." My father's voice boomed, muffled but clear. I walked calmly to the door and unlocked it. I opened it wide and stood in the doorway, blocking their entry. They stood there in the hallway, a united front of indignation. My father's face was red, his eyes bulging. My mother looked pale and drawn, her expression a mixture of anger and theatrical victimhood. Mark stood slightly behind them, his arms crossed, a familiar sneer on his face. "What do you have to say for yourself?" my father bellowed, jabbing a finger in my direction. "Do you have any idea what you put us through? We were stranded, humiliated." "You left us on the street," my mother cried, her voice cracking. "With no money, no place to stay, how could you be so cruel, Luke, to your own family?" I looked at them one by one, letting their initial volley of accusations wash over me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match their anger. I responded with a quiet, simple question. "Why were you in Spain?" The question seemed to throw them off. My father sputtered for a moment. "What? We were on vacation, a much-needed vacation." "I see," I said, my tone still even. "And how did you pay for this vacation?" Silence, they looked at each other, a flash of shared guilt passing between them. Mark was the first to break it, his voice dripping with scorn. "Oh, come on, don't act so innocent. It was the emergency card." "The emergency card," I repeated, nodding slowly. "The one I gave you for a medical issue or a critical car repair. Was this trip a medical issue, Mark? Was it a critical car repair?" "We were stressed, we needed a break," my mother insisted. "That's an emergency, a mental health emergency." I almost laughed at the absurdity. A mental health emergency that required 3 first-class flights and a luxury villa, an emergency you chose to document on social media. I finally looked my mother in the eye. "I saw your post, Mom, the one about finally having peace without drama. Tell me, who was the drama you were so happy to get away from?" Her face flushed and she looked away. She had no answer. "You used my money," I continued, my voice gaining strength not in volume but in conviction. "You stole from me. Let's not pretend it was anything else. You took my money to go on a vacation that you deliberately excluded me from, and then you had the nerve to insult me publicly while you did it." "It's just money, Luke," my father boomed, trying to regain control. "We would have paid you back." "No, you wouldn't have," I said, the words sharp and final. "You never do. What about the 3,000 for your transmission? What about the 2,000 for Mark's tuition that turned into a camera? You don't see me as a son. You see me as a line of credit with no limit and no interest. A resource to be tapped until it runs dry." I took a step forward and they instinctively took a step back. For the first time, I wasn't the one on the defensive. "I didn't leave you stranded," I said, my voice dropping to an almost whisper, forcing them to listen closely. "I didn't do anything to you, I simply reported a crime. Your vacation was funded by fraud. When the fraud was discovered, the funding disappeared. The consequences you faced, the locked doors, the humiliation, the frantic calls for help were a direct result of your own actions. Not mine, I just stopped enabling them." They stared at me, their anger deflating, replaced by a stunned disbelief. It was as if they were seeing me for the first time. Not as the compliant, easy-to-manipulate Luke, but as a stranger who was laying their sins bare on the floor of a public hallway. "Fix this, Mark," I said, turning my gaze to my brother. "You wanted me to fix this. There is nothing to fix. This is the new reality. The bank is closed. The emergency line is cut. You are on your own." With that, I stepped back into my apartment. "I think you should go," I said, my hand on the doorknob. They didn't move, just stood there, speechless. "Go," I said again, more firmly this time. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. My mother was openly weeping now, but her tears had no effect on me. They were tears of self-pity, not remorse. Finally, my father turned, and with a final defeated glare, he led his broken family away from my door. I watched them go, then closed the door, turned the lock, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my own private fortress finally secure. After I closed the door, an extraordinary silence descended upon my apartment. It wasn't the empty silence of loneliness, but the full, rich silence of peace. The storm had passed. The confrontation I had both dreaded and anticipated was over, and I was still standing. I walked over to the window and watched as my father's truck pulled out of the parking lot, its movement sluggish and heavy, as if weighed down by the truth. In the days that followed, I existed in a state of strange and wonderful lightness. It felt as though a massive, invisible weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders for my entire life had finally been lifted. I hadn't realized how much of my mental energy, my emotional bandwidth, was consumed by managing my family's expectations, navigating their moods, and bracing for their next request. With that gone, I felt a surge of freedom that was almost dizzying. There were no more calls, no texts. It was as if, by finally refusing to play my assigned role, I had ceased to exist for them. The silence was their answer. It was their punishment for my rebellion. But what they intended as a punishment, I received as a gift. About a week after the confrontation, I got a letter in the mail. It was an official-looking envelope from my credit card company. I opened it with steady hands. Inside was a short formal letter confirming that their fraud investigation was complete. The disputed charges, all $8,431.57 of them, had been deemed fraudulent and permanently removed from my account. Seeing it in black and white was the final validation. It was official. I was the victim, not the villains. The resolution wasn't a single dramatic event. It was a slow, quiet unfolding of a new life. I started investing the money I was no longer siphoning off to my family. I took a weekend trip to the mountains just for myself and paid for it with cash. I felt no guilt, only a quiet joy. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected because I was always too busy or too drained by family obligations. One evening, my phone buzzed with a text from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in a while. "Hey Luke, heard there was some big drama with the family. Hope you're okay." I smiled. The story had clearly made the rounds, likely a heavily edited version where I was the heartless monster. I simply texted back, "I'm more than okay, I'm great, let's catch up soon." I was reclaiming my own narrative. The ultimate resolution came not from them but from within me. I realized that myself. Worth had been tangled up in my utility to them for far too long. I thought that by being the provider, the reliable one, I could earn their love and respect. But that kind of love, the kind that has to be purchased through sacrifice, isn't love at all. It's a transaction. And I was done with transactions. I have no idea what they're doing now. I assume my father's business is still teetering, that my mother is still complaining, and that Mark is still waiting for the world to recognize his genius. But their lives are no longer my concern. Their problems are no longer my burden to bear. I have chosen to step outside the circle of their chaos and build a life based on my own terms, my own values, and my own peace. My apartment is still quiet. My phone no longer buzzes with demands. My bank account is only used for my own needs and my own dreams. Some might call what I did an act of revenge, but I don't see it that way. It was an act of survival, an act of self-respect. I didn't destroy my family, I simply stopped allowing them to destroy me. And in the silence they left behind, I finally found the one thing they were so desperately seeking in Spain: peace without any drama. So to anyone out there who finds themselves in a similar situation, playing a role you never auditioned for in a family that takes more than it gives, I have to ask, what would happen if you stopped? What would happen if you put your own well-being first? It might be the hardest thing you ever do, but it might also be the thing that finally sets you free. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.